last week we set up certain postulates, at least the main postulate is the Rambam seems to talk about ואהבת לרעך כמוך in Shirish Chi a very different way than he talks about it over here in the Minyan HaMitzvos. And we pointed out similarly, he seems that it's not as clear there in the midst of Yush and Abbas Hashem, Yush Hashem, or Abbas Hashem. Certainly, we're talking about Ava. So you get the impression that the mitzvah is a mitzvah of an emotional attachment. And the Ram says the way you do Abbas Hashem is through intellectual prowess, understanding things. And the Ram says the way you do the mitzvah ואהבת לרעך כמוך is developing character traits. So there, in the mitzvah of Abbas Hashem, the Ram clearly says that by developing your intellectual prowess of understanding the Rebbeinu Shalom, you will memela have a emotional love for the Rebbeinu Shalom. So I would assume similarly over here that through the character trait of yedidus, friendship, you will develop a certain ava, an attachment to your friends. And that is what's going on. Okay. But then it's very clear that the mitzvah is the emotional attachment, the ava. And that's very important. And we pointed out that, and we'll explain this a little bit more later, that the Ram says that the mitzvah of Ava is of your friend is not to love him like you love yourself, but to want for him what you'd want for yourself. And we pointed out the Ramban even says that itself is our father. But the Ram says that the mitzvah is to want for your friend what you want for yourself. And I assume that's a shiurim in the expression of your emotional attachment, emotional love. Because he says the mitzvah is to love. And then he says, how do you do it? And this love expresses itself because of my love, my friend, to this degree, I would want for him what I want for myself. However, we pointed out that l'cheira, the source of wanting for him what I'd want for myself, is the Maimah of Chazal, which you find also in a Tosefta in Sanhedrin of Brolo Misiyofa, and it's the life after Lach Kamoicha. Because if I would be Chayiv Misa, I would want a Misiyofa, so therefore I give it to my friend. And the Ram says it very clearly in Pirush Mishnayos. Prach bo kol bnei Aaron shel nisrof chitzonis gufo v'yom Hashem bohem yifko es asreifa v'yosinu azeh chemlo al odom mipnei shezeh memahes misasa. Om Hashem v'after lach kamoich m'shem she'odom in nischai misa o yeboiche li'atzmoi hamoves achikal v'ashe inuyoi pochois kach naase b'zulosenu in nischai skilo yisokol be'even achas kmo shekodem. And we found a similar thing in when the Ram says, "V'chol ma she'esne la'atzmi, o l'mi she'dovek bi esne lo k'mohu," and that l'chol is reflected in the Gemara Shabbos Lamed Aleph Lamed Aleph. Oma loy dialoch sone lechavloch loisave. Zui kol haTorah kula. V'idach pirush zil gemir. We pointed out also the Gemara Kedushin, Daf Mem Aleph Lamed Aleph, the Ram of Yehuda, Omar Rav, Oslod Meshikadis Isha Ad Shireno, Shem Yirena Dover Yirebo Dover Maguna V'Diskanalov, and we said, what's the pshat in that? Because if I would be a girl and wanted to get married, I would want my husband to see me. So to make sure that this is something that he wants to protect my relationship, so I should do the same thing to her. The interesting thing over here, and which we're also to take up, is what's happening over here. You're supposed to do certain things, or you're not supposed to do certain things. And l'chayra, what's going on is the mitzvah is it's a very strange thing, because the mitzvah is the emotional attachment, or which comes into expression because of the midah of yedidus.
Got it.
So, the question is, what's going on over here? It's after Blo Misi Yofe, I'm doing a pu'ula. So it means that since I want this for myself, if I would be in such a situation, I want it for my fellow man, and I have to therefore act on it. Does the mitzvah require such a thing? Or that is something like we see in the Rambam in Hilchos Ovil, in Shirish Beis. So let's see what we see in Shirish Beis. The Ram says, "B'bnei shenismochim b'tos hazois monu b'chlal mitzvasei b'kocholim v'nicham avelim u'kfuas mesim b'glal adrash hanizko b'yomer yis'al b'oidata lehem es haderech b'chulei zoglim es chasodim yechu ze b'kocholim v'chulei v'choshvu shekol pulu min ha'pulus halolu mitzvah fnei atzmo v'loyodu shekol ha'pulus halolu v'doimehen nichnosos tachas mitzvah achas michlal ha'mitzvahs haksuvas b'Torah b'beyo v'omer yis'aleh v'ahavta lira'ach k'mocha." So the Ram is talking about a pu'ula, and I can imagine there's a thing, if I would be a chayla, I would want people to visit me. If I would be a mace, I would want people to be. It's interesting that you evaluate it also on people who are dead, who are not, wanting anything, but okay. And if the big okay. So you have that, and you have it similarly in Hilchos Ovil, in Perek Yudal Aloch Aleph. Mitzvah Seishel Divreim, Levake Cholim, Lenachem Avelim, Leitzos Ames, Lachnis Akala. L'avois orchim, l'saseh b'chol tzorch gvura, v'chule. And the Ram says, Afal pi shekol elu, shekol mitzvahs elu midivreim, hari hein b'chal ve'ahavta lira'cha k'moich. Kol advorim she'ato roitze, she'yasu oischo, l'cho acherim, aseh ato oison ve'ochicho b'toru mitzvahs. So what happens is that somehow, you see, the mitzvah is that the Abba should express itself in my wanting this. And you get the impression that we go further, not expressed over here in the mitzvah here, but in Shirish Beis and in Perek Yudal V'chas Ovel, that this Ratzon should be expressed in a pula. That which I would have wanted for myself, I do for my friend, which is taking it to a whole new level. And you don't see it in the mitzvah over here. And the question is, what happens? See here what I think and what I've said many times. The Ram is very careful, and he says in both places, both in Shiur Sheni and in Hilchos Ovel, that this case of Pu'ula is B'chlal ve'ahavta lira'cha k'moich. And I've pointed out on many occasions that the Rambam learns that the mitzvah is pshuta shel mikra, and that which is the drasha might only be b'chal, but it's not pshuta shel mikra. And then you would say that the pshuta shel mikra is an avo which is augmented through yedidus. Now, what I want to point out to you, and I'll prove more that this b'chlal actually means drushes in other cases, maybe we'll see. But I want to tell you something interesting is going on over here. Because when you think about Shirish Tes, what's happening is that the character trait is being used in order to help me have this feeling of ahava, this emotion of ahava. And that's the Ram's talking about Shirish Tes. But what's happening over here with the pu'ula? It's not that the pu'ula is being utilized as a modus operandi, a method for me to have love for my friend. But what's happening is that the pu'ula is an expression of that love. Right? Let's take the steps again. I have a feeling of yedidus, which gives me an emotional ahava, which expresses in a way that I want for somebody else what I want for myself. And the b'chlal over here says it doesn't stop with wanting, but I have to do this l'maisa. It's not enough that I want for this kala to have a wonderful chasana. Just like if I would be a kala, I also would want a wonderful chasana for myself. but I have to act on it. And that's only bichlal, because the mitzvah is the emotion. So if that's the case, I would go a step further and say, Lu yitzur amachnis kala, but it's not an expression of that I want for them what I want for myself, which is really an expression of a love for my fellow man. So l'cheira, it's an empty performance. That's what I would assume. Maybe I'm wrong. But you see, we're talking at two different ends of the stick over here. The tchunas hanefesh are used to help me develop this feeling of love, the friendship. And on the other hand, once I've developed this feeling of love, and I want for my friend what I want for myself, bichlal, the mitzvah is to act on it, which is a new level. And that's only bichlal. Another raya for this idea bichlal, that it's only it's only a drosh, it's not pshuto shel mikra. The Ram uses it in mitzvah memhei, where he talks about seret l'nefesh, that the pshuto shel mikra is making a kolcha or whatever, and there is a drosha of loisasu agudis agudis. If you do kolcha, you chayiv malchus, and if agudis agudis, there's no chiyuv malchus. And the Rambam explicitly says in mitzvah memhei that this is not pshuto shel mikra, the agudis agudis, and it's only bichlal. You can have another example of simchas yontif. The mitzvah itself is basa chagiga or shalmi simcha, but the Ram quotes in hilchas yontif that bichlal, the mitzvah of simcha, is noshim anoshim b'royim lehem, noshim b'royim lehem, ketanim b'royim lehem. This is bichlal. So what I want to suggest is what's nischadish over here, that bichlal is a new level of wanting. Not only should I want, but I should act on it. And then that's the bro lo misiyofa. And also, you could imagine that if you'd imagine an Aseh of Ve'ahavta Lach Kamocha, because we found L'shenis in the Gemara mashma like that, and that Aseh l'kadish isha chirena, or a man or for example, the Lashon of the Sefton Sefer, Perek Hey, Alachir Aleph, Hoya Mei Oimer, Anoisi Isha, Shein Ogenes Loi, Oiver Mishum Chamisha Lavim, Mishum Bal Tokum, Bal Tito, Bal Tizachir Luvecho, Ve'ahavta Lach Kamocha, Oiver Mishum Ve'ahavta Lach Kamocha. So there's an Isa. So this Isa, I assume, is also only bichlal, because the Isa say really in pshuto shel mikra is if there is, the question is, what is the Isa say? Here you're having a pula. The pula is only bichlal. And I'll explain to you what I mean more. If you look at the Ram in Hilchos Matan Saniyim, in Perek Ches Halacha Yud, he says, "Ve'ein lecho mitzvah gedola כפדיון שבויים, שהשבוי היו בכלל רעבים ועצמאים וערומים ועומד בסכנת נפשות. ואמר למענוב מפדיוני, הרי זה over על לא ישא מצוות לבבך, which is do tzedakah. וביטל מצוות עשה, וביטל מצוות פסח תפתח, אס יודך לו, ומצוות חייך עמך, ואהבת לרעך כמוך. The Rambam calls it a bittul. However, the Rambam very clearly says that the Isa to Mekadesh and Isha ad Shireno is mamish v'zeh also la'omroi yis'al v'ahavta lira'ach kamocha. So it means there's an Isa Aseh. That's in Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. So what I'm wondering is, maybe you can only imagine an Isa Aseh if you're actually doing something. If you're Shevi al Taseh and not doing anything, the worst you can imagine is a Bittul Aseh. So the Rambam, when he's talking about not giving money for Pidyon Shvuyim, that's a Bittul Aseh. Because just 1 second. No, you see, it's even more than that. It's more than that. You see, you could ask yourself another, let's take it a step back. If you go back to Pidyon Shvuyim and Ve'ahavta Lira'ach Kamocha, you're basically in the same situation as you were with the other cases. Because in Pidyon Shvuyim, the mitzvah of Ve'ahavta Lira'ach Kamocha is only mechayiv me to want for my fellow man. But I don't have to act on it. Acting on it is the drasha. Because all he says here in the mitzvah again, v'chol ma she'eretz la'atzmi eretz lo kamo, v'chol ma she'etz la'atzmi etz lo. But it doesn't mean that you have to do anything. So l'cheira, Pidyon Shvuyim is also bichlal v'ahavta lira'ach kamocha. But all I'm doing by not doing it is a bittul aseh. So I think that what only happens is everything l'cheira is the same. But if I do something b'kuv aseh, and I do something which I would not want to happen to me, that's an Isa Aseh. But even though the drasha of the B'chal mitzvah is mechayiv me to do something, but if I'm a Shevi al Taseh, that's only a Bittul Aseh. So it's a very interesting thing. The mitzvah itself, again, let's just keep it straight. The mitzvah itself starts with character traits, expresses itself in emotional love, and the shum of that emotional love is my want for myself, I should want for him. And then, bichlal, the mitzvah is not only should I want, but I should act on that wanting. And we assume, and it's a very important assumption, that if I say that dirty good for nothing, I hate him, and I dance at his wedding, I'm not sure if I'm a kind of after Achkamocha. I'd find it, I'd be surprised. Okay. Now, next. Now, let's take it another step. And just point one thing out, okay? I'm not sure, and this becomes very strange. You see, there's one thing I'm very confused about. Until this point, I'm okay. Okay? But didn't we learn that Gemilas Chasodim, which is all about ואהבת לרעך כמוך, that it's begufay? Does one have to be moitzi momon for ואהבת לרעך כמוך? And l'chayra in Pidyon Shvuyim, that's what comes out. In other words, if I want my friend to be motzi momon for me, if I want for myself that someone she motzi momon, the taka is a chiyuv mishum gemilas chasanti motzi momon. On one hand, it's very hard to believe, but on the other hand, if you ask yourself, hachnosas ochim, you have to put food on the table, so that's also money. So, is it actually true that even though we normally interpret that Gemilas Chesed, in other words, it could be, you see, I could imagine that there is a Chesed b'mamoinai, but I'm mechuyev to do it b'mamoinai. That's a big chiddush. And l'chayr, that's you see with Pidyon Shvuyim. And I would assume, maybe I'm wrong, that's what's going on. You see, on one hand, that's true, but you see, I also understand that if it's avok gufay mamish, you could be motzi moment, maybe mochiti motzi moment, like avas ishtoi, or the one of the Amoraim who claimed that he loved Talmid Chacham like he loved himself. The Raman Hilchos Ishus, as far as the Ishtoch Gufay in Perek Tes Vav Aloch Yutes, the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yutes Amud Aleph, Omar Baravashi Pesil Li Letzuv Rabbanon Ladina. If the Tzuvon comes before me, I pass it myself. My timer, the chovel of the gufai. And the Gemara in Shab, another Gemara, Kufi Chesma Beis, Womabai, Tasili, the Chazina Tzuvon Rabbanon, the Shalom Mesechte, Avida Yom Tov Rabbanon. He's giving out money. But that's maybe it's chovel gufai. Well, the mitzvah of Ahavta L'Chamoicha is not chav guf. I just want for him what I want for myself, and we talked about acting on it. But there's a chiddush l'chayr. You see in Pidyon Shvuyim, it's very clear that this b'chlal you mechuyev taka to be motzi momon, and you mevatel mitzvah Aseh by not being motzi momon. Now, we think we're there, but we're very far from there. Let me read another Rambam, which is also an enigma. The Ram Mishnah Torah in Perek Vov Avilchus Deis Halacha Gimel. Mitzvah kol adam lehov kol echad v'echad miYisrael kegufay. Shenema v'lehavta lira'ach kemוך. So he's talking about love. Okay, it's an emotional thing. Then he says, Lefikoch tzorich l'saper b'shvochay v'lochus amamoinoi kashil chas amamoin atzmoi v'loitz b'chvoid atzmoi. This thing doesn't make much sense. What's a lefikoch? The mitzvah is through an emotional tie. It is true that there is kilu a drosha that which I don't want for myself, I shouldn't do to my friend, or maybe that I should act on the wants, but that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is through midas, through tchunas hanefesh, and to develop a certain sense of love. So the word lefikoch, everyone quotes this Rambam, when they're talking about it. But the question is, what does it mean? How could it be such a thing? I find it very difficult, okay. And l'cheira, we only find in Shurish Chi the idea of midas. So maybe you could say simply that the same way that bichlal we have to act on this rotzai, and the same way, so certainly if I would want someone to misapa b'shvachi, so maybe I should have to do it for my friend. And maybe that's what he's saying. This, I think, is difficult. And the leficha doesn't make any sense because it's not a logical conclusion. The mitzvah is doch, there is, if you say a drosha of kol madi ovid, of the bichlal, but to say on the mitzvah itself, lefikoch, is very difficult, I would say. And you get the impression, and I'll tell you even something else. What the Ram says in Hilchos Ovel is a general thing. Whatever I want, I should do, but not specific actions like hachnosas orchim or hachnosas kala or bikol cholim. Those peculiar actions, the Ram clearly says, is only the Rabbanon. And it's not true. It's only the Rabbanon. And the Ram quotes the Pasuk, the ואהבת לרעך כמוך, and Hilchos Ovel, and in Hilchos Days, he says, Lefikoch, that I have to do that. Because mitzvah kol adam love, kol echad v'echad miYisrael kegufay, shenem ואהבת לרעך כמוך, Lefikoch, tzorich l'sapeh b'shvochay. It's something very peculiar. And the mitzvah is not mechayev, something very peculiar. And the Ram doesn't say, Lefikoch tiknu chachamim, or lefikoch tzivu chachamim, like he might say in Hilchos Deis in Perek Aleph Halacha Vav, and this is not what happened. This is lefikoch tzivu chachamim. He says there is a mitzvah lefikoch. This is what you have to do. Even without tzivu chachamim, there's no takana over here. So I want to suggest something. I think the question, I think is certainly valid. I didn't see anyone talk about it, just everyone says over the Rambam, but I think this analysis, I think certainly has merit. So the question is, what is this? So what I want to do is suggest internally from various Rambams what the word lefikoch means, and then to apply it here. Let's take a few cases. Hilchos Deis, Perek Vav Halacha Aleph, which is not far from this case. We're in Perek Vav. Halacha Gimel, this is Halacha Dalet, this is Halacha Aleph. Derech b'yosa shel Adam, liyois nimshach b'deyosav uv'maisav achareov b'chaveirov. V'noeg k'minig anshe medinosai. Then he says like this, Lefikoch, tzorch Adam l'schaber l'tzadikim, v'leishev eitzach hachamim, tomid, k'dei shilu ma'aseyim. B'yisrachim v'nushoyim, ahochem b'choshech, k'dei shelo yilu ma'aseyim. So, if you think about it, you can't say the Rambam is giving you a drasha about Boy Sidbok, therefore that's the mitzvah of l'schaber l'chachamim, tzadikim, whatever, because the Rambam only talks about the mitzvah of l'schaber l'chachamim and halacha beis. Let you see it. It's an amazing thing. You get the impression in Perek Vav Halacha Aleph derech b'yosav shel Adam deis ma'aser acharabim hoif anshevinu lefikoch tzor Adam l'schaber l'tzadikim v'leishev eitzach hachamim tomid k'dei shilmu ma'aseyim. Halacha beis mitzvah say lidobek chacham k'dei lumu ma'aseyim shene'emar Boy Sidbok v'chiev sheli Adam lidobek el kach omu chacham b'ferish mitzvah zu hidobek b'chacham tamei lefikoch tzorch Adam l'shtadel sheyisa bas talmid chacham sheyisa bas talmid chacham v'yasi bita l'talmid chacham v'lecho v'lishtois l'talmid chacham. Okay, you notice something else. In Halacha Aleph, he's having a discussion prior to the mitzvah of Boy Sidbok. And l'cheira, if you look at Perek Vav Halacha Aleph, it's a sequel to his whole discussion of Midas. Since it's a mitzvah of Halachta B'dracha, and everyone wants to develop his midas the best possible way. So lefikoch tzorch Adam l'schaber l'tzadikim leishev eitzach hachamim tomid k'dei shilmu ma'aseyim, and you should develop midas. Liyos nimshach b'deis ma'asav acharabim, and that's tomid. So I would say over here that we're certainly not talking about the mitzvah Boy Sidbok, but the Ram is telling you how to develop, how to be kinder the mitzvah of Velachta B'Drachav, that by being tamid, Eitzel Chachamim, you'll be rogil and develop proper midas. So lefikoch is an eitzah of what you should do in order to mekayim a different mitzvah of Velachta B'Drachav. We're going to do it by sibach, and that's tamid because that's the way to l'sragil. Let's take another case. The Ram Perek Dalet of Hilchos Deis, Halacha Aleph, Chol v'heyois haguf bori v'sholem midarkei Hashem hu, shari efsher shiyoven o yeda dov midis habori b'uchila. So you have to somehow develop, okay? Lefikoch tzorch lahachik odem atzmai midvom mabnis haguf. So what he's doing is, the fikr is telling you how to get to a situation where you have a guf bori v'sholem. In Hilchos Tshuva, in Perek Yud Halacha Vav, Dover Yedua Ubora she'ein avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu niksheris b'libo shel Adam ad sheyishka botom b'koloi v'yazav v'chulei. It's a modus Es koine kfi koyach sheyesh bo'odam lahavinu lahasig. This is the way that a person can be koine the ideas in order to get ve'ahavta lira'ach kamocha. This is the way l'sragil. So what I'm suggesting, and now I want to prove it a little bit, that l'sapa b'shvochai is not a kiyum in v'ahavta lira'ach kamocha, but it's a modus operandi to help one develop the two different things. Character traits are the way that you do the mitzvah. You have friendship, so you move further. Without empathy and friendship, there can be no love. That's the discussion. But how do you help do your push-ups? You're constantly always thinking about talking positive about people that will help you develop it. But now I want to tell you something. You see, if the question is there a kiyum of the sapa b'shvachai of after lira'ach kamocha? If that would be against me. If I can prove or point that there's no kiyum, then I have a much better case. What I'd like to do is to try to prove this. And I would test the following. The Ram Pirush Mishnayis in Ovois Perek Aleph Mishnah Tes Zayin. V'ani oime ki adibor yischalek lefi chiyuv teresenu lechamisha chalokim. Mitzvah, there's a dibor which there's a mitzvah for. V'oso, and there's dibor which is also, and there's dibor which is mos, and there's dibor which is ohuv, and there's dibor which is mutter. Ohuv means that, you get brownie points, but there's no mitzvah. Mutter means there's no isa, no heta. Then there's also a mos, and there's mitzvah. The question is, where would you put l'sapa b'shvocha shechavera? Would you put it in mitzvah? If you interpret lefichach the way most people interpret lefichach, I would put it in mitzvah. So when the Ram talks about mitzvah in Pirush Mishnayos and Ovois, he says lefichach. He says like this: Achelik Rishon, v'hu hamitzvah, hu kriyas tatera, v'limuda, v'iyun bo, v'zu mitzvah aseh mechuyeves, v'dibalta bo, v'hi k'moi kol hamitzvos. It's a big chiddush that l'chayra in Talmud Torah, the verbalization, even in Torah Shabbat Peh, is actually a mitzvah. I always thought the mitzvah was to understand. Okay. Then, so it's not, the Sapa B'Shvocha didn't make it there. He says, in Dibo Ohov, he says, he doesn't also say the Sapa B'Shvocha. Dibo Ohov, he talks about Dibo B'Mailas HaTzadikim, that Acherim will go in their path. So l'chera, if I talk about shvach of my chaver, and he's not a tzaddik, and I'm trying to present him as a tzaddik, it's not even dibo ohov. So l'chera, I would assume it's only dibo amuta. So if it's only dibo amuta, how can you say that there's a mitzvah lefikach of kemוך and lefikach sochel sap b'shvocha? So I would assume that it's a way, a ploy to teach me something or to get me involved in something. Something like the Ram says in Perek Aleph, the Ketzad Yagul or the Matzah B'Deus Elu Achik Verobo as Aseh v'Yishne v'Yishalish b'Maisim Shois Al Pi Adeis Poem Soyois v'Yachz B'Hem Tomid Achiu Maiseim Kalim Olo v'Lo Yeh B'Hem Teirach v'Yikmer Adeis then v'Yikver Yikmu Adeis B'Nafshu. So the Pula brings something in his nefesh. So I would have assumed that maybe what the Ram is trying to tell you is that the pu'ula of the speaking b'shvach chaveroi is a way for me to help me put the avos reya as and the emotional attachment as part of me. And again, I would assume if there's a kiyuma mitzvah of ve'ahavta lira'ach kamocha by saying shvach haveroi, I would have put it in dibo hamitzvah, dibo ov, and Ram doesn't put it in either. That's my suggestion. still, let's be honest, okay? Once you say that to do for your friend what you want to do for yourself is always b'chlal, the mitzvah of ואהבת לרעך כמוך. So I would have assumed that it's also the speaking of shvach haveiroi is also b'chlal ואהבת לרעך כמוך. So I'm not sure how strong my proof is from the Ramenovos, because I would have assumed then it certainly should have been Dibo Ov. And that's very confusing. But I didn't learn Pshat like that, because you can't say Lefikoch on the mitzvah itself after lach kamocha and come to something which is only b'chal. And that Lefikoch shemachai is on b'chal. That's the reason I went where I went. I'm afraid, or maybe I'm wrong, that someone's going to come to me and say, there's a whole different way of understanding this. The same way the Ram says in the mitzvah of Avos Hashem, he says, Lefi, in mitzvah Aseh Gimel, Lefi shekasher ato oihev es mishu tahalalenu v'tashapchenu v'tikla b'nei odni didusoi. And that's the way kasher ato oihev es mishu tahalalenu v'tashapchenu v'tikla odni didusoi. So the Ram's basically saying something else then, that if I would really love him, I would mishabech him because I want others to love him also. This sounds a priori very good, okay? But there's a logical fallacy. Because the wanting other people to love him like you love him, okay, that I could have imagined that is the zenith of Avas ואהבת לרעך כמוך, okay? But you can't make a statement in Mishnah Torah that since it's a mitzvah and every single Harry and Joe and Lou, because it's a mitzvah, I have to misapel shachavere under all circumstances, that's the explanation of the Rambam. That sounds to me very difficult, and to say the least. So again, I could imagine that misapel shachavere, that I want other people to love him, and that's the zenith of ואהבת לרעך כמוך. But I don't believe that's the Ram is talking about in Perek Vav Halacha Gimel. Okay, now that I think ends the mitzvah of ואהבת לרעך כמוך. And let's just have a preview a little bit of the next mitzvah. Mitzvah Reish Zayin. He shetzivonu lahov es hagerim. V'omo yis'ale v'ahavtem es hager. The separate mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. V'af al pi shehu nichnas b'zeh im Yisrael v'yom v'ahavta lach kamoicha. But Teres v'ahavta lach kamoicha, I have to love the ger also, independent of this new mitzvah. Shezeh hager ger tzedek was if you define ger as a ger Toshov, or someone who's living in a different land, then you could have done whatever you want. But this ger is a ger tzedek. So he's a Jew. So you don't need anything more than that. Ve'ahavta lira'ach kemוך. Aber b'nei shenichnas b'torasenu, which we have to understand what this is. This is an explanation. Our b'nei shenichnas b'torasenu. I think Kapach translation a lot better. Nichnas mechodosh be'emuna v'das Yisrael, which the Ram is something like the Ram says in Perek Vov Aloch Adal in Hilchos Deis, Avas Hageh shebo v'nichnas tachas kanfei hashchina. He's done something. He's demonstrated a love of the Rebbeinu Shalom, or something that he has made his own decision of nichnas tachas kanfei hashchina. Hoisif okel ahavo v'yiched loy mitzvah neisefes. So the question is, what is this? There's another mitzvah that's the same thing again? That's very difficult to say. See, if it would be the same thing again, I imagine that it's a chizuk of ve'ahavta lira'ach kemוך by the ger. But the lashon here l'chayra, there's a separate mitzvah, and it says something very important. Choisif or kel avo. It means you're supposed to do something more and different than the pasuk ve'ahavta lira'ach kemוך. The question is, what does that mean? That's something amazing. We'll have to talk about that. V'yiched loy mitzvah neisefes. Kmo she'osa v'yashor b'oino she'ne'emar v'leisoinu ish es amisai v'yomar v'ger leisoinu. There's a separate ashor. And here, there's a separate mitzvah. But what does it mean, hoisif loy? It means it's only to for chizuk, or it's a. But he says hoisif or kel avo. V'izboi miloshin hagmor b'metzia shechiyoven al einos ager mishum leisoina ish es amisai u'mishum v'ger leisoina gam kein onu chayovim v'avosai mishum v'ahavta l'ra'acho u'mishum v'ahavta mesager. So it's not 100% clear, but hoisif le'avo v'zeh mavua ein boi sofik, ein sofik boi. V'eini yodeya odem mish shemona mitzvah, a mitzvah shesichel zeh, that he knocks this mitzvah out. Then he says, word of the drashas, Beiru shekel tzivonu al hager, k'moch tzivonu al atzmo yis'al, om v'ahavta lira'ach, v'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, v'omar v'ahavta mesager. What is we want with this comparison? Mitzvah Hashem will pick this up in Mitzvah Hashem next Sunday night. The shiur won't be Monday, but Sunday. I apologize. I have a wedding. And have a freilich and pur.